5,000 degrees Kelvin. That was the last reading from the Vorn's Pride before the telemetry didn't just flicker. It vanished. 12 seconds. In the time it took Jolthur to blink his primary lids, an entire sector of the Great Armada became a shade of nothingness. Logic dictated a massive hull breach or a reactor containment failure, but the sensors remained stubbornly silent. There were no debris clouds, no emergency transponders, and no radiation spikes. I have seen many empires fall, but never with such surgical silence. You should listen closely, for what the humans did next redefined the very meaning of the word impossible. The rhythmic, dry clicking of Jolthur's data stylus against the stone-like surface of his palm had been the only sound in the intelligence theater 3 days earlier. Back then, the extermination order against Earth felt like a clerical formality. The Vorn Hegemony did not declare war on Level 2 civilizations. They merely updated their stellar charts to reflect a newly vacant territory. Jolthur had reviewed the telemetry of the departing fleet with the detached interest of a geologist watching a slow-moving glacier. There was a certain beauty in the massing of 40,000 warships, their obsidian hulls absorbing the light of the Vorn home world. Beneath the primary console, a low hum, then nothing. The faint, ozone smell of a localized cooling fan struggled against the heat of the Intel terminal as Jolthur pulled up the historical archives of the species known as Homo sapiens. He was an intelligence historian by trade, a role that usually involved cataloging the final screams of dying worlds, but Earth was proving to be a statistical anomaly. Most species, when faced with an extermination directive, responded with frantic diplomatic pleas or desperate, disorganized military surges. Earth had responded with a handwritten note. The physical slip of paper had been delivered to a border relay station by a single, unarmed scout ship. It was currently digitized on Jolthur's screen, the primitive scrawl appearing almost comical against the high-resolution tactical displays. It read, "Sorry for the inconvenience. We've already taken care of the paperwork." Jolthur's skin, a metamorphic granite that usually remained smooth and impenetrable, developed a hairline fracture along his left cheek. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a biological failure of his internal cooling system as his brain processed the contradiction. The humans hadn't moved a single fleet. Their orbital defenses remained at standby. Their radio chatter was filled with trivialities, weather patterns, sports scores, and commercial advertisements. He leaned closer to the terminal, his sensors scanning the diplomatic gift the humans had sent alongside the note. It was a navigation chart, designated EO41. It was an absurdity. The chart featured a bold, golden line indicating a fleet trajectory that cut directly through the center of the local G-type star. "They are mocking us," Admiral Kael'tor had rumbled when Jolthur first presented the data. The Admiral's stone skin was a deep, unblemished basalt, the mark of a warrior who had never known doubt. "They suggest we fly into a furnace because they know they cannot stop us on the battlefield. Proceed with the standard formation. We will burn their atmosphere to glass by the next lunar cycle." Jolthur had wanted to agree. The math supported the Admiral. 40,000 ships versus a world that still used chemical propellants for its planetary shuttles was not a contest. But Jolthur kept looking at the chart. He thought of the Battle of Midway, a primitive human conflict he had discovered in their deep archives. The superior force had been annihilated not by better steel, but by broken codes and perfect timing, which meant the Vorn were no longer the hunters. The thought settled in his mind like a grain of sand in a precision engine. He began to run a cross-analysis of the Vorn's secure routing protocols. The Hegemony used a quantum entanglement encryption that was supposed to be unbreakable, the gold standard of the galaxy. Yet, as he watched the current telemetry of the Armada, he noticed a micro-delay in the fleet's positioning updates. It was only 3 milliseconds, barely enough to register, but it was consistent. Something was intercepting the fleet's signals before they reached the Hegemony's sensors. Jolthur switched his display to the forward scouts of the second wave. These were the fast movers, the ships meant to pin the humans down while the heavy hitters arrived. On the tactical map, 10,000 lights glowed in a perfect, aggressive wedge. Then the first light went gray. Then the second. Then a dozen more. It wasn't a tactical withdrawal. It wasn't a destruction by kinetic fire. The icons simply ceased to exist. On Jolther's skin, a second crack spider-webbed across his brow, a tiny puff of mineral dust drifting to the floor. He frantically recalibrated the long-range sensors, trying to find a signature, anything, that explained why 10 light-years of space had suddenly become a graveyard. The ozone smell intensified as his terminal redlined. He bypassed the safety filters, pushing his consciousness deep into the telemetry streams of the disappearing fleet. He wasn't looking for ships anymore. He was looking for the silence. Jolther switched between displays frantically, his multi-jointed fingers blurring across the haptic interface as he tried to reconcile the sensor data with the slaughter unfolding in the void. The Vorn High Command had built their strategy on the assumption that space was a battlefield of distances, but the humans treated it like a game of shadows and heat. The Hegemony's secure routing protocols had not been broken by brute force. They had been haunted by an intelligence that saw the Vorn's predictable movements as a set of instructions. The low, rhythmic thrum of the terminal's emergency backup power vibrated through Jolther's seat, a dull, mechanical pulse that seemed to mock the absolute stillness of the tactical map. He pulled up the encryption logs one last time. The humans hadn't just intercepted the routing, they had rewritten the Vorn's own navigation subroutines to lead the fleet directly into the path of a pre-calculated solar ejection. That was all that remained of the Vanguard. While the Vorn fleet moved with the rigid, predictable elegance of a conqueror, the human vessel had plunged into the very heart of the local star, utilizing a series of experimental shielding arrays and a suicidal gravitational slingshot to emerge from the solar corona at a relativistic velocity that turned their hull into a kinetic weapon of pure, incandescent fire. It was a maneuver that should have vaporized the Lazarus, yet the telemetry showed the human ship's internal temperature holding steady against the inferno. Jolther stared at a secondary data drop. The entire engagement had lasted precisely 12 seconds across a distance of 3 light-years. In that window, the Lazarus had fired exactly once, a concentrated burst of plasma that used the star's own energy as a magnifying lens. The communications channel hissed. A voice, calm and heavy with the weight of undisputed authority, filled the intel theater. "Earth does not request permission to exist," the unnamed commander said. "Neither does this warship." Jolther dropped his datapad, the screen shattering against the floor as he watched a new signature appear on the long-range scanners. His stone skin cracked again, a jagged fissure opening along his shoulder. He realized with a sickening clarity that the armada the Vorn had sent was not the target of a war. It was a nuisance being cleared away. The massive fleet the Vorn had fought was just a long-range patrol. Earth's actual response fleet, the one they had supposedly massed for defense, was only just arriving at the system's edge, 10,000 signatures blooming on the sensor array like a field of lethal flowers. He pulled up the apology note again. The humans hadn't been apologizing for the war. They were apologizing for the mess they were about to make. The telemetry returned to the 5,000 Kelvin mark, stabilizing as the Lazarus slowed its drift. The human ship sat at the center of the debris field, a dark, jagged needle in a graveyard of Vorn slag. It didn't broadcast a victory cry. It didn't demand a surrender. It simply waited. Jolther opened the final report file, his fingers trembling as he marked the Vorn hegemony's status as provisional. The civilization that had ruled the sector for 10 millennia was now a footnote in a human logistics report. The star chart route, EO41, flickered one last time before the terminal dimmed. It was the exact trajectory the Lazarus had taken, a golden path through a fire that should have been impassable. Jolther closed his eyes, the dust from his cracking skin settling on his console like snow. The official receipt from Earth arrived as a silent notification on the secondary monitor. It was a simple confirmation of the Vorn's initial extermination order, archived and filed without comment. Outside the observation port, the local star continued its slow, indifferent burn. The gold line on the display remained fixed, a permanent scar across the map of the galaxy.